A lot of times at the Council on World Affairs, our whole focus is how do we help bring global to the local? And how do we help show people that the global's already here? And the museum's a great avenue for that because it's been global before global became cool. So this exhibition not just marries global and local, but it's money and art, two great things. When did you come up with this? I mean, what?
We use money every day, and you know, those transactions are usually so seamless. We don't really think about it. We hand over our credit card or our $20 bill, and it just seems to happen. But we don't tend to think about the nature of value in our lives, or also the connection between that casual transaction and the global economy, or really about our collective feelings like trust. And the show is obviously called In Blank We Trust. I should mention too that we have on each of your tables a catalog of the exhibition. So if we point, if particular works come out, I might send you to a page, and you can designate somebody at your table to be the bearer of the image.
By the way, if you'd like it at your table, we'd encourage you to buy it. It's not as expensive as you think, but it does have a price. So if you spill any salad dressing on it, you've just bought it.
So there are 26 artists in this exhibition. I won't name them all, but they hail from a dozen different countries. And so, yes, I mean, part of the kind of genesis of the show is about looking a little closer at our money, making it a bit strange, but also, I think, offering us a window into contemporary art. A lot of people, people are familiar with money, but they may not be quite as familiar with what artists do today. And so this was a good opportunity to, take something that was familiar, that had both local and global connections, and to provide a window on how artists have thought about the nature of that thing.
How many people here have had a chance to go through the exhibition yet? Okay, so it's good. And it's right out there, which if you get bored and want to walk, you could do that, but it'd be more appropriate if you waited till the end and did it then. So let's switch then, William, to you as an economist. There is no art in your world. It's the economy. So when you think of money, take us to step one, Money 101. Like, what is money? What's currency from an economist perspective?
Well, I should start by saying that this exhibit is an excellent introduction to art for an economist because we know nothing about art, and I was happy that I could make some connections while I was going through there. So, economists, we define money as a commonly accepted medium of exchange. So there are two aspects to that definition. The first is that it is a medium of exchange, and so it's not an item that you accept because you are particularly interested in that item. It's that you accept it so that later you can spend it and acquire something that you are interested in. In the exhibit, there's a remarkable work by, I believe it's J.S.G. Boggs, where he has drawn a $500 bill. And Tyler knows much more about this than I do, but from what I understand, he actually spent this drawing of a $500 bill to cover an expense that was around $496. And so in...
Page 26.
Yes. And so this piece of art functioned in that transaction as a medium of exchange. But it's not a commonly accepted medium of exchange. You couldn't take this piece of art to your local Kroger, or if you needed to fuel up on your way home, you couldn't reasonably expect that you're going to be able to exchange that piece of art for $500. And so from an economics perspective, money is a commonly accepted medium of exchange. So it not only needs to be a medium of exchange, but it also has to be commonly accepted. And that necessarily gets us into questions of community and what it means to be a part of this group as opposed to that group. And so there are lots of interesting questions that follow from that.
What was the first money? I think so. Barter would not be considered, that's a different kind of transaction.
Right, so we usually distinguish barter transactions from monetary transactions. The problem with thinking about the origins of money is that we had monies before we had written documents that survived to the present. And so we have, instances of money, archaeological evidence of money as far back as we have historical accounts. So a very old concept, to say the least.
Okay. And maybe let's talk a little bit about the name of the exhibition, In Blank We Trust, or In We Trust. Why?
Well, as we mentioned that trust is at the heart of what money is. It's a social contract that we can't accept, and we wouldn't accept any money if we didn't trust that we could pass on that money and it would hold value. Of course, the phrase "In God We Trust" is there on every denomination of U.S. currency, and it has been for quite some time. I think beginning in the latter half of the 19th century, which, as one artist quipped that this phrase, it was actually J.S.G. Boggs who quipped that, this phrase "In God We Trust" came onto our currency shortly after the introduction of the greenback, which was the first U.S. currency that was not, it was the first national currency in itself, but it was also not quite backed by gold in the same way. It was more like an IOU, that it was promised to be paid in gold at some point. It could be exchanged for gold, but it was basically our first fiat currency.
Let me pause there. So greenback, what?
So Tyler's making a distinction between historical monies that we had that we can call commodity monies. These emerge naturally out of barter relationships. And so when you think about a commodity money, you can think about gold or silver or salt, some item that is useful in and of itself. And that's very different from modern monies, fiat monies, which are only useful as a medium of exchange. If no one else is willing to accept dollars in transactions, what else do you do with those dollars? I guess you could wallpaper your house with them. And in fact, after hyperinflation in Germany, there was some wallpapering going on. But aside from some of these trivial uses, the only use of these modern monies are as monies.
Do you know the origin of greenback, the word? I mean, what?
Well, it was a note that actually had a green back. And so they were called greenbacks.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, what J.S.G. Boggs kind of quipped is about the introduction of the phrase "In God We Trust," that when you could no longer trust in gold, they invited you to trust in God. And that's a very, the relationship between like that kind of faith in the social compact, that is at the heart of currency, and sort of other kinds of faith, religious faith, is an interesting question. Money itself it can be at least a physical object, but it's also the embodiment of an idea. It has a kind of spirit to it, which is, a concept. But so, I mean, that was one sort of part of that title, but the other is that in 2008 with the global financial crisis, it really provoked the question of trust. In what do we trust? That is, so the blank there, at once it provokes a question of what do we trust in anymore? But on the other, it provides a certain space for us to sort of fill in mentally of the things that in which we trust. Is it ourselves? Is it democracy? Is it, art in some ways too requires a sense of trust. So for me, it's less about the removal of God, because anybody is welcome to fill God back in to that space, but it is about creating a space for the affirmation of the things in which we do trust.
I wouldn't want to be the one that defaults on the loan from God. I don't know. Do any other countries have this notion of a deity as part of their currency, or can you? I think of the places that I've been, and they all have like people on it, or nationalistic. Do you know of any that you sort of have the God thing?
So nothing's coming to mind, but
yeah.
these ideas that that we put remarkable images on our currencies is it's something that I think economists should think more about, but something that many of us can appreciate in and of itself as non-economists. Oftentimes, economists overlook things that are apparent to everyone else. But there's a real problem in convincing people to accept a new currency. And one way you can overcome that problem is by marking these notes with images that are familiar. Images that say, this is not really all that new. These are things that we're used to. These are things that we associate with what it means to be us. And so by doing that, by putting pictures of presidents or national images on our currency, it helps that acceptance process. And so we can look all over the world and see that this is universally happening.
It's worth noting too, I think, that the phrase "In God We Trust" became the national motto and emblazoned on all of our denominations of U.S. currency in 1956. So this is the kind of height of the Cold War, at which, at a time in which the U.S. is making a very strong distinction between its own sense of national identity and that of sort of godless communism.
Interesting. Wow, okay. Now I'm thinking about, in U.S. money, there's that pyramid on it with the eyeball. And I've read all the Da Vinci codes and seen National Treasure, but what's that all about?
Well, so this is another interesting aspect of the images that are on our currency, because it's very important in that launching stage that you get some buy-in from potential users of the new currency. But once you have that buy-in, you want it to remain familiar. So you want to be very slow about making changes to the currency that you have. So although it's very important that those images connect with the initial acceptors of that currency, it's not as important today that the images that are on our notes resonate with us as modern Americans, because the dollar, those images, we associate them now with dollars, not their original meanings. And so we can continue to accept those dollars because now those dollars are familiar to us.
So do you happen to know what the original intent
I have
of that
no
was?
idea.
Okay. If you think you do, you can tweet it and we'll verify it. Do you happen to know?
I'm sure Google knows.
Google knows. Okay. Google knows all.
The
In
external
Google
mind.
we trust, right?
Well, we can't trust in gold or government redemption anymore, so Google is what we're left with.
But that, the eye at the top of the pyramid, it's the eye of providence, which is the all-seeing, unblinking eye of God, essentially. There is a work in the exhibition by Sarah Cann. It's a series of $1 bills that she has made these abstract paintings on, which are sort of geometric, and they play with the form of the pyramid, the triangle. But she has left unpainted the eye of providence, as well on the obverse, the eye of George Washington. And she calls these, I mentioned that money has this kind of spiritual or sort of magical quality to it, this intangible thing which is value. And yeah, there is this sort of kind of slightly occult, sense of the pyramid and the eye of providence. But the artist herself thinks of these works, she kind of refers to them as talismans, as these sort of charms that you might hang in your house and that they would sort of watch over you, or that you could talk to them and tell them what you want, and it will come to you. So she kind of thinks of these dollar bill paintings as a sort of a window into the universe.
Interesting. You mentioned gold. Let's just go back a step to the idea. So is there enough gold in Fort Knox if we all wanted to cash in? And where did that all come from, and where are we now on that?
So I don't know how much gold there is in Fort Knox. I do know that U.S. notes no longer carry that redemption clause of old, and haven't for some time. During the Bretton Woods system, other countries could redeem dollars for gold, but U.S. citizens weren't able to redeem. And so now, whereas in the past, if you had taken in some banknotes to a bank, you would be able to get $1's worth of gold out. If you take $1 to your bank today, they'll be happy to give you 4 quarters, maybe even 2 50-cent pieces, but no underlying commodity.
So what's it? So now there's no thing behind it. Is that
Well, Tyler refers to it as being kind of magical, and I think that when we hear that, we all kind of snicker. Right? It's not so magical. We've always accepted dollars. It's very familiar to us. But in 1984, two monetary economists, very famous monetary economists, Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz, wrote a very interesting article called "Has Government Any Role in Money?" And perhaps the most interesting thing about this article is the tone that they take, their skepticism, their uncertainty about whether or not this dollar, which for a little over a decade at that point had been completely divorced from any underlying commodity, whether that was going to last into the future. 1984 wasn't that long ago. And so although it's very familiar to us today, the tone of that article suggests that it wasn't so strange to think of that as being magical very long ago.
Let's dive into some of the, although some of you haven't seen the exhibition, we could talk about some of the themes that come through. And I'm thinking around cultural, social, political elements of currency, implications of that, and in particular, maybe I remember when I was in the exhibition, seeing the colors. What's it called? Currencies.
There's a work by William E. Jones called Color Coordinated Currency. Yeah.
Does color come into play? I mean, it sounds like greenback was sort of the color was just what happened to be what it was, but is there deliberate decisions to make currency have a particular color from what you know?
Yes. So for one, there's just a technical aspect. You wouldn't want the $1 bill and the $5 bill in a currency where you have multiple colors. You wouldn't want them to be the same color because it's more likely that they'll be confused. And so just like coins are often of different shapes, if you have a multicolored currency, you're going to want denominations that are relatively close together to be of different colors. Now, the precise colors that you pick are probably going to have a lot more to do with, on the one hand, financial considerations, like what's the cheapest way to print these notes and still make them difficult to counterfeit. On the other hand, there's probably some social aspects to this as well. And so if you live in a society where red is associated with prosperity, your notes are probably more likely to be red. On the other hand, if you're an emerging country and you conduct a lot of trade with the U.S., and the U.S. is seen as a very stable economy, and you're going to introduce some new notes, then green is an appropriate color, because now you can at least, in some sense, link your currency, the color of your currency, to this stable currency that's widely accepted.
The other piece I noted is that some currencies have particular symbols on it. So most have a person, someone who's revered in the nation or culture. Some have animals. I noticed when I was in there looking. When I lived in Indonesia, I remembered. Well, I didn't remember until I saw it now that some of the currency has the orangutan on it, and fairly unique to Indonesia and must be a point of pride still, and was at the time. Are there other animal examples? And you're smiling because I know
So a really funny story about
a lot of
this.
experience with Somalia and its currency. And
Yeah, in 1975, the currency of Somalia was radically redesigned. And part of that redesign featured on their 5 Somali shilling notes, I believe it was 3 wildebeests and 2 zebras on the back of these notes. And they were beautiful notes. The only thing is that there aren't wildebeests in Somalia. This had, notes are produced in relatively few places. So these notes were produced by the Delarue company, and so the banknote designer had designed these beautiful notes, and it actually survived through the 1975 issue and through the first round of printing in the 1978 reissue. And it was only after the first batch of those notes went out where someone said, wait a second, we don't have any wildebeests, and the zebra's not very common here. And so those were appropriately replaced with
There's so many reasons why global education matters. That's a great one. I'm going to use that with the students. Let's think about it, geography. I mean, a lot of times currency delineates geography delineated by currency. And I remember you talking about the euro, and you were talking to a group that I was listening in. I said, I happen to have a few euros, and back when you were in the UK, it had a value, and here, right now, it didn't. Can you talk a little bit about political geography as it relates
I
to
think it's one facet of this work, which is on the cover, and you can also find it inside, by William E. Jones, is that he's an artist that's interested in money and currency from different places, and he collects different currencies. And he has scanned them all and composed them, not according to geography or value, but according to simply their color. And so here we have, the Ayatollah next to Lenin and all of these national symbols. And I think what you really, you perceive in that is, these sort of symbolic attachments that all of these sort of individual nations have to, and that is part of the nation itself, has sort of famously been called an imagined community, and the currency is, an important aspect of that. It gets more complicated when you have currencies like the euro that go beyond a single national border to encompass many different nations, and that's part of the struggles with the value of the euro have had to do with that kind of divorce from the nation state and its currency, and the lack of controls that particular nations in that currency community would have over the value of the euro, say. But yeah, whenever we travel the world, we tend to keep a little bit of that money. We have this sentimental attachment to money that is a kind of souvenir of the places we've been. And I think in seeing a work like this, you also can imagine that sort of attachment that people would have to the currency that they use. Whether it is from Somalia or Ghana or Venezuela or another place. I think the images of currency refer not just to the symbols of the nation, but also to the regular people who would use this money. And I think, so the work is, as much as it is about these national symbols, it's also about just that we are all, it speaks to a kind of common humanity, right. I think. But it is sort of strange when you travel from one place where you're using one currency, and then you just get on a plane, you land, and then that which had quite a bit of value is all of a sudden worth nothing, unless you go to an exchange office and
then you lose most of it on fees.
Get the currency appropriate to your geographic position.
I think there was an exhibition or a piece in there that talked a little bit about using currency and or civil disobedience through currency, and it was, I think, a Brazilian. Yeah. Can you talk about that and just
Certainly.
what?
The artist is named Cildo Meireles. He is from Brazil, and in 1970 or so, he began. There was a sort of famous incident where a television journalist named Vladimir Herzog was arrested by the military police. So Brazil at this time was under an authoritarian military regime, and freedom of expression did not exist. But so Herzog was arrested, and his suicide was essentially staged in a prison. But everybody knew that he had not killed himself. But this was the government's story at the time. They have since sort of admitted that this happened, that he was murdered. So Meireles created a stamp that said, "Who killed Herzog?" And he began stamping it on money and spending it, essentially using the circulation of currency to piggyback a kind of critical statement. There are others that he made. One of them was sort of "Yankees Go Home," that he stamped both on Brazilian and U.S. currency. And this is a work that was first shown in the United States at MoMA in 1970 in a show called Information.
I wonder if anyone's ever done that in the U.S. I was just thinking about campaign season.
It's kind of disappointing that the American equivalent to that is "Where's George?" right?
There is something called Occupy George, which are these. You can go online to find it, but there are stamps that are. So these red stamps which have these graphic information about income inequality in our society, and they're made to be put on U.S. currency.
There's also the $5 Bill Murray. I don't know if you've seen this, but they've managed to make Abraham Lincoln look like Bill Murray, which is
wow. Got a hold of that
impressive,
one.
Really.
Let's talk about China, and I know there's some questions. Please just hold it up. There's one there. There's a couple more. So I had in my wallet, because for sentimental value, is the Chinese currency. And I was looking at it the other day as I was preparing for this, and I looked on the back and I saw 5 languages that weren't immediately obvious to me to be 4 that weren't Mandarin. And so I looked into it a little bit more, and I thought about one of the themes, which is around how governments yield power or what decisions they're making when creating currency. And I found out that the languages are all minority populations within China. And so I wonder to myself, is it to be inclusive that is there, or is it to remind people that the Tibet is part of China, that the Uyghurs are part of China, that that kind of thing? And so, is there anything you could talk about that, where governments deliberately?
Well, to return to the case of Somalia, the Somali language wasn't a written language until I believe the 1960s, maybe 1971. And in that redesigning in 1975, one of the things that they did was include the new script that was used for the Somali language to write everything in Somali. And so before, Somalia has a history of it was colonized by I believe Italy and Britain, and so they had used those languages and neighboring languages in the past, but now they had their own language, and so that was definitely a unifying force, I think.
Got it. This question comes from the audience. Can you reflect on both I think it's symbolic and economic perspective, the implications of a nation not only pegging their currency to the value of another's currency, but even using the currency of another as their own?
Well, I can handle the economics. Some countries, it turns out, aren't very good at managing their own currencies, in part because they face pressures that we don't face here. So if you're in a country where it's very difficult to raise tax revenues, the incentive for you to just print up a bunch of money and spend that money into circulation to pay your bills as a government is much stronger. The problem with that is that everyone knows that you face those incentives, and so they're likely to devalue your currency before you do. And so one way to get around that, to perpetuate, to generate this acceptance of your currency at what we might call a respectable value, is to peg that currency to a more stable currency. And oftentimes, though not universally, oftentimes it's the dollar. The problem with the peg is that it's not that much better than the words you were using before. Before you were saying, trust me, I won't print a bunch of money, I will protect the value of this currency. And now you're saying, trust me, I will maintain this fixed exchange rate. But of course, you can break that exchange rate, and countries have. And so the next step, the more credible commitment, is just to perhaps tie your hands entirely and say, I know that I won't be able to resist this temptation, or at a minimum, I know that you won't be able to believe that I can resist this temptation, and so we're not going to have a unique currency. We're just going to use someone else's currency, and presumably you would choose someone else's currency that's reasonably well managed. And so you see countries like Ecuador that use the US dollar.
Got it. And China does not peg to the dollar, is that right?
They peg, I believe, to a basket of currencies. And so the reason you would do that is because maybe choosing one currency to peg to, that currency might have a monetary policy that's appropriate for the country of issue, but not appropriate for your country. And so if you choose a basket of currencies, you get some gains from diversification there. So just like you wouldn't buy a single stock or put all of your wealth into a single asset, you would want to diversify there. So countries want to diversify in that respect as well.
Great. This one I think is appropriately back to you, William, again, is because it gets into a topic you know a lot about, which is Bitcoin and technology and the role technology's played in money. So can you talk about Bitcoin and others has had a significant focus recently. Can you please discuss where you think this trend is headed and the role of government in this form of currency?
Yeah, well, maybe the most striking thing about these digital currencies, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and other altcoins that have been created after Bitcoin.
Did you say crypto?
Cryptocurrencies. So that's a portmanteau, I guess. Crypto just refers to the fact that these digital currencies use cryptography to ensure that the person who's sending the funds actually possesses the funds, and the person receiving the funds is the intended recipient. And so they're called cryptocurrencies. Sometimes they're called cyber currencies. But the interesting feature about them is that they're private alternatives to the norm today, which is government-issued irredeemable fiat monies. There's perhaps one exception. The Lakota Indian nation has issued its own cryptocurrency, and so you might call that quasi-sovereign support, depending on how you think of the sovereignty of the Lakota Indian nation. But for the most part, these are non-profit enterprises or for-profit enterprises. There's a cryptocurrency, Ripple, that is produced by a firm, and they are intending to create a currency that will be valuable so that then they can sell parts of this currency and make a profit from that. And so that's perhaps the most striking feature, is that they differ quite significantly from the monies we're used to in the sense that there's not really a government directly behind them. If anything, it's the opposite, right? There are governments in front of them saying, wait a second, maybe we don't want to go down this cryptocurrencies road. A lot of cryptocurrencies enable what we might call quasi-anonymous exchange, which is great if you're, say, someone who wants to make a political contribution and you don't want your employer to know that you're giving a contribution to a candidate from a particular party. It's great if you're living under an oppressive regime and you don't want that paper trail that says you're purchasing goods and services that aren't available in your home market but are perhaps necessary to your survival. But it also enables exchange of illicit goods and services like drugs, and in some cases there have been some contract killings that were, at least the contracts, whether or not they were executed, I guess in a very literal sense there, whether they were executed is another matter, but the contracts were sold in Bitcoin.
With all this identity theft and security, you think they'd be able to figure that one out? I mean, it seems like one that would
Well,
work.
I said quasi-anonymous. There was a very popular exchange called the Silk Road where you could go online and purchase primarily narcotics. And the FBI did, they have a suspect. He hasn't been tried at the moment. Ross William Albrecht, they believe was the Dread Pirate Roberts was his online handle, but they found him in the physical space. So that's why I say quasi-anonymous and not strictly anonymous.
Wow. This one came from Twitter. Thank you, Stephen Kelly. Can you discuss the quickening trend toward eCash as it relates to community and trust?
Well, Tyler brought up this point earlier about having euros and not being able to spend them. eCash and using electronic payments, even in our face-to-face interactions, might remedy this problem. So if you go to Germany, for example, and you buy a coffee and you swipe your American issued credit card, you're actually paying in dollars. The bank that is supporting that credit card makes a transfer from dollars to euros, and then the store receives the euros. There's no reason we couldn't do that in electronic payments here. If you had, say, a euro denominated credit or debit card and you went to a local CVS and swiped, the same kind of transaction would take place. And so if we can do that with dollars and euros and yen, then presumably we can do that with Bitcoins and Ripple coins. And so this type of technology, having a financial intermediary that will broker those exchanges, even without the seller realizing. Right? So in these cases, the German coffee shop doesn't need to know that they have just accepted payment in dollars because they haven't needed to receive payments in dollars. They're continuing to receive payments in euros. And so that is maybe a point of optimism for alternative currencies in the future.
Again, questions you can forward to us. We know that your time is money, so we'll make sure to have you out of here by the right time. But speaking of that, boom. Tyler.
I can see the segue.
It was very subtle, but for smart people like you. But the time bank, I'm thinking of other form, like technology has also helped just, with things like sharing time or buying people's time or swapping time. Can you just talk about this concept of a time bank, which is in the exhibition?
Certainly. There is an installation in the show by Eflux, which is two artists, and it's the Eflux Time Bank. And you can go online. There is a website, Eflux Time Bank, and they have time banks in various cities. You essentially create a profile, and there are listings, sort of want ads or offers of services. It can be babysitting. There's one on the wall that says philosopher wanted. And essentially the idea is that, I can spend 2 hours teaching somebody Spanish, say. I do not earn any money from that transaction, but I earn my 2 hours. And those 2 hours go into the time bank, which keeps this account. And it's not quite a barter system. It's really a non-monetary or transaction, or it's sort of an alternative currency, you might say. which is based in units of time. So I earn my 2 hours, and I can use those 2 hours on somebody else's labor to, I don't know, weed my garden or to write something for me or something like that. So, so as an artist project, so we have a bunch of sort of prototype currencies that are designed by different artists. Nedko Solikov is one, and Julieta Rando is one of the artists behind the eFlux Time Bank, has made another, Anton Vidokul. And there is also an archive sort of filing cabinet there where you can explore a number of files about money and alternative currencies and things like that. But it became fairly popular in Europe, and particularly in places of high unemployment, like in Spain, for example, where people didn't have a lot of money, but when you're unemployed, you do have time on your hands. And so this was a system which could, ameliorate some of the effects of unemployment and poverty by using this sort of resource, which we all have, but is nevertheless limited, which is our time, and making that a kind of unit of exchange. And one of the things I found interesting about bringing it here was that the notion of time banking was begun here in Ohio. And there, in 1827, a fellow, an anarchist named Josiah Warren, created the Cincinnati Time Bank, and he ran it from 1827 for the next few years before going on to found some intentional utopian communities around his philosophical principles. But in a sense, this is a global phenomenon. And on the wall there are listings in Korean and Japanese and German and other languages. But it does have a kind of tie back to its historical roots here in Ohio.
Excellent, excellent. Let me just do the last question from Twitter. And this one has I think this probably would be for you, Tyler. It's art related, although I wouldn't want to, preclude you, William, since you've been gaining an artistic aptitude here. I display 100 trillion Zimbabwe bill in my office. 100 trillion Zimbabwe bill in my office. What other currencies are popular decorative pieces, currently or historically?
Can I interject here? The economist John Taylor has said that no self-respecting monetary economist walks around without a $100 trillion Zimbabwe note in his wallet. I should then tell you that I am a monetary economist.
There is one in the show, I should say.
And I don't have one in my pocket, so you can draw your own conclusions.
Did you find any other in your research for the exhibition that people really love having some currency on their walls? Any pop out? I'm imagining Zimbabwe's is because it's such a large number. It just sort of is like, whoa, 1 trillion.
Yeah, it really does provoke that question of like, what is the value of? Yeah. And yes, actually, in the vitrine, which is part of the eFlux Time Bank installation, you will find some high denominations of Zimbabwean dollars. Essentially, I think the suggestion is that, if this could be another form of, even that could take on another value, perhaps as part of a time bank. But yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know of particular currencies that might be especially decorative, but I did notice recently that the Norwegian currency was recently redesigned from, and it's an architectural firm that won the competition. It's actually two firms, both won, and they were going to put one in the obverse and one in the reverse. But the one that I find is particularly interesting is it's an abstract, sort of pixelated image in different colors, which I found quite attractive. It's beautiful.
All right, 10-second final round for each of you. You get to answer this question. I've got $100 million and I want to invest it. And I'm going to give it to you actually to invest, Tyler. And do you invest it in a piece of art, or do you invest it in the stock market?
I'd invest it in the Columbus Museum of Art.
The gift that keeps giving. All right, William, how about you?
I would probably be the equivalent of disbarred if I said anything other than just buy broad-based mutual funds and diversify, diversify, diversify.
With that, please join me in thanking our distinguished guests.